What is this?
Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the YouTube channel of the European School of Theosophy. Today, we are giving continuity to our 2021 interview series, and we have a very special guest with us today, Jan Nicolaas Kind. He was born in Amsterdam and is a social worker and human resource manager by profession. He was also active in the hotel and music industry. At present, he lives in Brasilia, Brazil. Jan became a member of the Dutch section of the Theosophical Society in 1994. Before moving to Brazil, he lived in Australia for a couple of years. And later, he also spent some time working at the international headquarters in India. In the sections of Holland, Brazil, and India, he held various positions and lectured widely. Currently, he is best known as the editor-in-chief of the e-magazine Theosophy Forward, which has been on the air for almost 13 years now. He considers himself a karma yogi, treading the path of unconditional service. All through his life, he showed great interest in modern history and politics, while music, next to Theosophy, remains his greatest passion. Jan, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today. It's really and truly an honor. So I do have the first question I have to you is, well, you lived in a country, quite few countries, Holland, Australia, India, and now Brazil. But you were born in Amsterdam. Why don't we start right there? What was like to grow up right in the center of the city? And by the way, close to Anne Frank's house.
Well, that's a good question. And thank you for the introduction. And thank you for all these nice things you said about me. Thanks for having me. And I think that, you know, when we talk about Amsterdam, Erika, it is like a lover. Amsterdam is a city you can leave. And for example, I've left it a number of times. But every time you come back, you know, the city will embrace you and make you very welcome. I realized that the first years of a child's life are extremely important for the further development. And I think that growing up in Amsterdam as a child really determined my way of thinking. I think that being in the position to live in a city that is almost 800 years old, the first 5 years spending in a house that was, I think, something like 400 years old, and being there really influenced me. I'm really charmed about that photo that you put up there.
Is it your mom?
This is my mom, and you know, and obviously that Humpty Dumpty over there is me.
Yeah.
And you can already see the investigative mind, because I'm just exploring a birthmark that my mother had on her cheek. You know, I was already investigating things. Anyway, this particular photo must have been taken in 1951. I was born in that year, so it's 70 years old. This particular picture was on Dam Square, and everyone who knows a little bit about Amsterdam knows that Dam Square is in the heart of the city. That is where the fishermen in 1275 or a little bit earlier started to build a dam in the only river that is close to Amsterdam, the Amstel River. And you know, this picture really illustrates in a way the surroundings where I grew up. The house where I grew up was just a stone's throw away from this particular square. Many people who come to Amsterdam take pictures there. There is a national monument there. to honor the victims of the Second World War. There is a royal palace there. There are a lot of bars and places and restaurants where people can go into. But I found this picture very, significant, because this little Humpty Dumpty there is there with his mom in the center of the city. The house where I grew up for the first 5 to 7 years was quite close to this place. And I think that when I became aware of my surroundings, when I really found, a sort of way of, determining what was happening around me, I thought that, this was really something that, put a big sort of impression on me, the city itself. When I grew up, when I was a little older, and I think I went to kindergarten or some kiddie school, I don't know. I remember that was only a street away from where I lived, and I was intrigued by pictures on the wall. And one of the pictures on that wall, Erika, was a picture of, now I know it was Anne Frank. And then I started asking my mother in particular questions about who was Anne Frank. And you must also see this in the time frame. It was 1955, 54, and it was just about 10 years after the finishing of the Second World War. So I heard stories about Anne Frank, who she was, and I just started to identify myself as a 5-year-old child with people that surrounded Anne Frank or that were with Anne Frank. And the nice thing actually was that the street where I lived was very close to the place where Anne Frank had actually lived. It was on the Prinsengracht. That is where Anne Frank went in hiding, I think in 1942 or 1943, to hide away from the Nazis. And I remember so well that I could hear the bells and the carillon of the Westerchapel. Oh, there it is. And, and I imagined that Anne Frank would have heard the same bells and the same carillon. She actually, in her diary, writes about that, that she heard it. She could, through the window in the roof, she was able to hear the sound of that particular church. And for me, it was a very fascinating thing, Erika, just to imagine that I could hear what she had heard. Of course, I think when I was 5, 6 years old, I was not completely aware of all the ordeals that she and her family had to go through, but it intrigued me. And I think because of that particular experience, I always say, even if you do not read, if you don't feel like, for example, studying Theosophy or whatever, there are at least 2 books in your life that you need to read before you go. The first one is, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, and the second one is Anne Frank's diary. I think everyone should read that diary, and everyone should understand what this girl had to go through and what she actually stands for, even up until today. So that was my experience, in a very early stage. And I think that, as I said earlier on, that when you realize that the first years of a child's life are determining, I can say that this first 4 to 7 years, being in these surroundings, being close to that square where you saw with my mom, and being close to that steeple and that church, has been always influential in my life, Erika.
Yeah, I think that was an experience that reminded you of the importance of freedom and peace also, isn't it? Yeah. And you spoke earlier about staying often at your grandmother's house.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Is this your grandma?
This is one of the two grandmothers I had, and this
Yeah.
is the grandmother that I actually want to talk to you about. Yes, this is
Yeah.
my grandmother.
Could you tell me what sort of woman was she?
Yeah, also in my growing up, a very determining influence. My grandmother was a strong lady. You can see it more or less on this old black and white picture. And she lived on the other side of the harbor. Let me try to explain. So you had the center of the city, then you had the Amsterdam harbor, and on the other side of the harbor, you had a few regions where there were buildings and whatever. And my grandmother lived in a polder. And that polder had the nickname of being the Red Village, because many people who actually lived there were members of the Dutch Communist Party, or they were very, politically orientated to the left. And my grandmother was indeed someone who was a member of the Dutch Communist Party. And I have to explain that the Dutch Communist Party was not affiliated with the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, or with any of the other communist parties. They were independent from it. And she was very influential also in my thinking, because she told me about that, for example, and remember, this is the late 1950s, the beginning of the 1960s. She would say things like, women should not get married before they're 30. Or women should have the right to decide whether they would have an abortion or not. And that was, of course, unique for that time. She would also tell me, Jan, there are two places where you should never go. And then I would say, well, Grandma, what are those two places? She said, Jan, you should never go to a bar or to a church. Well, please, grandmother, explain that to me. So she would explain it to me. She said, well, if you go to the church or you go to a bar, both the bartender and the priest or the reverend will not tell you the truth. And you must see that in the context of the time. She grew up, of course, in a time that women had to really stand up for their rights. They had to, be very clear about, what they wanted. And according to her perception, people should really try to fight out things for themselves rather than going into the realms of a bar, where people easily get intoxicated, or where certain things could happen, or go to a church where they were not told the truth. So I think my grandmother was someone whose color was red. And even she had she could cook beautifully, and her favorite and my favorite soup was tomato soup, and her tomato soup was redder than red. It was really absolutely red, and I remember that very well. I think this picture here, if I remember it well, was taken on her birthday on the 31st of December. Sorry, on the 31st of May. But I cannot really recall the year. So this grandmother was the mother of my father, and she was quite a lady, Erika.
Yeah, she looks like a woman with a very strong personality.
Yeah, she was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Ian, your father, he was a musician. You grew up with music. What instrument did he play, or was he a singer? Did you learn how to play an instrument also?
Yeah, well, many questions in one. My father was actually a multi-instrumentalist. He played the piano, and he played it pretty well. He was also a violinist. He played the saxophone, the clarinet, and later in his career, he also played the bass, the big bass, boom, 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 boom. And he was also a singer, so he did everything. And his greatest dream, Erika, was to make a musician out of me. He really wanted me to become a musician. Now, can you imagine? I grew up in the 1960s, my hair were growing long and I was listening to music he didn't like. I listened to the Beatles and he was not ready for the Beatles yet. And so one day he gave me a guitar, a beautiful Spanish guitar with nylon strings and a little booklet, Etudes by Andreas Segovia. So I looked at that little booklet and when I had the guitar in my hands, I said, well, let's see how it goes. But very soon I found out that the nylon strings didn't really fit me. So I put, other strings on it, made of another substance. And instead of playing the Etudes of Andreas Segovia, I started to sing Bob Dylan songs, How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? So my father was so disappointed, he really wanted me to be a better musician than he was. But he's no longer with us, but I can tell him now, he was the best one. I will never come close to him. Erika.
Well, obviously, as your father was a professional musician, music influenced your life greatly.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
You even came in contact with Theosophy through music, if I am not wrong.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something more about that?
Yeah, this is very important also in the development, because what I'm trying to project here is how I evolved and ultimately came to Theosophy. I had not gone to Australia as yet. And I had met, I think it was in '69 or a little bit earlier, a well-known Dutch violinist, a beautiful man with gray long hair. He was a Jew. He was very outspoken and could tell beautiful stories. And he played the violin as no one else. And I remember that I went to his house and he would talk to me and we would sit down and he spoke about things I was actually intrigued with. He talked about that everything has a cause and a reason and that we are here not for the first time. He spoke about reincarnation. I didn't know what he was talking about. So what I found it very intriguing, And then he took his violin and then he started to play the violin, and oh my God, it was so beautiful. And then he said, I see colors while I play. And I said, well, I'm glad you see those colors, but I don't see the colors. And he said, that's because you don't look right. You have to look inside your heart, because that is where the colors are. And, we kept on talking and I met him a couple of times afterwards. And then it became clear to me, and this is long before I became a member of the Theosophical Society. Then it became clear to me that he was very much into Theosophy. He was very much involved. And in particular, the clairvoyant, lineage of what we learn in Theosophy. And so we started to talk about Theosophy. So at one point I asked him, I said, are you a member of any Theosophical group or whatever? And he said, oh, heavens no. I said, well, heavens no, but you talk about it so lovingly. He said, Jan, he told me, Theosophy is wonderful, but Theosophists, you have to be careful with them. They are fighting all the time whilst they talk about brotherhood. So he was very particular on that. And that actually was my very first one. There was a second one, which I will quickly also explain about later. And it was many years later, I met also a Jewish musician who was the director of the Auschwitz orchestra. He was a Dutch musician, and he was a colleague of my father. And I remember that I would visit him regularly because I wanted to record some tapes of old recordings of my father. And at one point, I asked him, so could you tell me how you survived the camp? You know, how was it possible for you to live through it? And then he said something that I'll never forget in my life. He said, we tried to demonstrate and to show compassion for our torturers. And that was really a sort of bullseye for me. You know, how can you possibly show compassion for your torturers? And then he said, yes, that was the only way for us to get through it. And then later, of course, when we read in The Voice of the Silence that compassion is no attribute, it is the law of laws, you know, that all came back later to me. This particular person was, familiar with Theosophy. He was not really studying it. But for me, it was an eye-opener, you know, because living through those ordeals was not easy. And showing compassion for those people who are treating you badly is something that, I had an immense sort of admiration for.
What do you mean, director of the Auschwitz orchestra? There was an orchestra in Auschwitz?
Yes, there was. Yes. I don't want to go into the morbid details, but people would, when they would arrive on the platform of Auschwitz, there was immediately a selection. Those who were going to go straight to the gas chambers, and others who would, be able to survive a little bit longer. And this particular person, a Jew, was also on the platform. He was the director of that orchestra. And then he would say, is there anyone who can play the saxophone? Or is there anyone who plays the violin? And then, oh yes, I'm a violinist, or I play the saxophone, or any other instrument. Then they could play in the orchestra. But don't forget that some of them hardly could play anything at all. But they knew that if they would be able to play in the orchestra, they had a bigger chance of surviving. And the orchestra was actually situated next to the entrance of the gas chamber. So when people would walk in, there was an orchestra playing. And so they would think they would take a shower. All these things are very well documented in a lot of historical overviews. And I think that Second World War, many people have already forgotten actually what happened. And I think it would be very good, especially nowadays, if people would go back a little bit in time and discover how big the suffering was, not that long ago. And, this person really pointed out to me that by being able to show compassion, even for those who torture you or want to kill you, is a way out to get over it.
This is very touching, really. I wonder, what was it like talking to people who have had lived through the ordeals of the Second World War? How did they find strength to go through the difficulties they faced as prisoners?
Yeah, I have already indicated somewhat, what they could possibly do. And I think basically when people are standing with their back against the wall, because human beings are very strong, they come to realize that in spite of all the suffering, there are ways of, modifying it into another sort of feeling so that they can live through it. And many authors, Elie Wiesel, for example, in the United States and others, have indicated that, for example, for those who were in the camps, one way of getting out of it or getting through it was cracking jokes, to in the evenings when the lights would go off, they would lay there in the barracks and they would, tell jokes to one another or they would create jokes. That was one way. And I think that, to live through an ordeal, and it doesn't really matter, in what world war or in what sort of bad situation it actually is that one of the ways of getting through it is to go back to the basics and try to understand the whole mechanism of what surrounds us and try to, uplift yourself in whatever difficulty you are. And, nowadays, and that as well as many other people do, where there is so much confusion on the planet, I wished that people would just go back and read that Anna Frank diary, or just read the books of Elie Wiesel, or just remember or try to imagine what it was like to live in captivity in a concentration camp because you were Jewish. The world at this moment is at war with ignorance, and people have forgotten very quickly what it was like to live through the First World War or through the Second World War. And I believe that if people would take a little bit more time just to realize that what happened a long time ago, that has also contributed to what we are right now. I think if people would take that notion and that trouble just to go back and think for a minute, And for example, Anna Frank writes, everything is bad, everything is horrible. I'm caught up here in this room, and then she writes something like, but I still believe there is goodness in people. And that there is this beautiful light out of that sentence that she writes, that I think if people would be much, not much more pointed to that, but if people would really understand what suffering is, they would be very grateful for the situation they are in at the moment. Erika.
Yes, I think that that's a very, hope is always there, no matter what situation and the circumstances we find ourselves. And important also to remember what's happening in Afghanistan and in so many places in the Middle East today with all the refugees and all the ordeals they are going through, isn't it? Now, changing a bit the topic, you were a singer, right? And you had a band.
Oh, yes.
And you were playing blues music.
Yes.
You also saw Jim Morrison and the Doors perform in Amsterdam.
Yes.
What was that like? And this picture, which I'm trying to... Oh, okay. So before mentioning the Doors, Jim Morrison, you have to describe for us this picture. And is it you down here with the glasses holding or what are you?
No.
You are standing up on the back?
Yes, that's me. That's me there. Next to the guy with the black hair, with the dark hair. He was the drummer. I don't know, his name was Frank. All the others, I have forgotten the name. Our band had a very sinister name. I think it was something like the Doom of Earth. And we played blues because blues music was pretty simple, but 4 chords or 5 chords. And and I think this picture must have been taken in 1967. So that was before Woodstock. We would play the school circuit in Amsterdam. We went to various schools to play at the school parties there. And that was quite an extraordinary experience to play in a band. I would just play the guitar, the 3 or the 4 chords. I would play the mouth organ, and I just remember this is a very wonderful occasion. I must tell you about this picture. It was sent to me just by someone a few months ago, and I just could not even remember that a picture was taken. And again, I go back to Amsterdam. This happened in Amsterdam. And you spoke about Jim Morrison and the Doors. I think that was a little later. It was, a pretty peculiar sort of event. I think it must have been, I could be wrong, but I think in September 1968. And there were two bands coming over from the United States. And please remember, this was before Woodstock. This was before we really knew what pop concerts were all about. And two bands were coming, Jefferson Airplane and the Doors. And they were pretty big in Holland at that time. And there were going to be two concerts in the evening and two concerts during the night. So the story goes that when the Doors arrived in Holland, Jefferson Airplane was already here. Jim Morrison stumbled down the plane, and as soon as he got to his hotel, he actually disappeared with a taxi into the city. So I remember that I entered the beautiful concert hall in Amsterdam, and Jefferson Airplane was playing, and we were very impressed. At that time, you just could walk around. There was no security or whatever. That you could sit at the podium or you could sit at another place. Later on, I understood that the management of the groups and the organizer, Paul Eckert, they were very worried because the second act, Jefferson Airplane, was playing. The second act would be the Doors. And Jim Morrison was nowhere to be found. He wasn't there at the theater. He was not in the concert hall. And they were extremely worried if he would appear at all. So to cut a long story short, they were finally able to find him in a bar on the Thorbecke Square in Amsterdam. They brought him with a taxi and he stumbled into the concert hall. But Jefferson Airplane was still playing. And I remember me sitting on the stage, and people who know the Concertgebouw, the concert hall in Amsterdam, know that there are two big stairs that go down. And all of a sudden the door opened and there came Jim Morrison, in his leather trousers, you're going up and down like this and dancing to the music of Jefferson Airplane. But it was not his act, he was the next act. So he went down to the podium, he tried to grab the microphone from Grace Slick, the lead singer of Jefferson Airplane, but she wouldn't let him. That was not a problem for Jim because he was just dancing on the stage, on the music of Jefferson Airplane. And later on, he went upstairs again on the big stairs, and the band Jefferson Airplane was still playing. And that is where he collapsed, actually very sad. He was transported to a hospital in Amsterdam. They had to empty his stomach because of the drugs and the alcohol that he had been using. And he stayed there for 3 weeks, I think, in total. So that was my experience with Jim Morrison and the Doors. But the funny thing is, Erika, you can imagine if you do that nowadays, everybody in the audience will go boo and whatever. Not there. Everybody said, oh, what a pity, Jim is not well. So, they felt sorry for him. So the Doors themselves came down and did their set just with the three of them without Jim Morrison. That was my adventure, or my encounter with Jim Morrison.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So now, I know that you moved to Australia in the early 70s.
Yeah.
That must have been quite a drastic change in your life. What experiences did you have during that period?
Yeah, I think I should, share with you and those who are watching that my decision to go to Australia just came overnight. Something had happened, and I thought, what I'll do? I go to the end of the world. There are two places I can go to. I can go to New Zealand, but that's really the end of the world in my imagination, or I can go to Australia. And when I had that thought, coincidentally or not, an uncle of mine who had already lived in Australia for a number of years, had come for a holiday to Holland. So I lined up with him. And I said, what about if I come to Australia with you? And he said, that's okay. So that's how it happened. I had to go through the immigration procedures, and within 3 months, much to the distress of my parents and my friends, and I said, well, what are you doing? So I want to go to Australia. So I went to Australia with my uncle. But to be honest, I was so unprepared, Erika. I remember that when I finally arrived in Australia and I was flying over Sydney Harbour and over the city itself, I was looking downstairs and I said, oh my goodness, they're all driving on the wrong side of the road, not realizing that they were doing the same thing as in England and so on. So, I think Australia was a kind of growing up period for me. That I needed to be away from Holland for some time, and I think it was a very exciting sort of period in my life, because I always say I did not only go to Australia, I went to Surfers Paradise, the holiday resort, because that is where my uncle had a job, and I just went through many sort of phases. Did all sorts of things, from cleaning windows. Can you imagine? The first job I had was cleaning windows, right? And I have fear of height. So I was cleaning windows in a big high-rise hotel on the 21st floor, and I was looking down, saying, oh my God, this is not what I want to do, So I had to do all sorts of other things. The nice thing is that in Australia, I came to know wonderful people. Australia is a wonderful country. Pedro and Linda and all the others. It's really a fantastic place. And, I had a good time there. Let's just say it was my growing up period there.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Did you learn how to play the didgeridoo? How do you call it?
The didgeridoo.
Yes.
No. I tried it, actually. I tried to do it.
Yeah.
No. It is completely impossible. You really need to start off when you were a little boy or a little girl. And I tried to do all sorts of ways. Now, the didgeridoo is not my routine.
No, it's not. Thank you. Anyway, now, how did you first find the Theosophical Society, Jan? I know that your first meeting was with Ali Ritzema. Could you tell us more about that while I'm sharing her picture?
Yes.
Here is Ali. Yeah.
Oh, it's my favorite picture of her. I took that picture when she visited me in Amsterdam a number of years ago. Again, because you should look at the time also. I don't want to make it too long and perhaps too boring, but I had gone through various phases.
Tell us more about that.
There is something, just
picture.
Okay.
Yeah. What is happening here?
No, it's an echo. Yeah, from the Facebook. Okay. Can you?
No problem.
Okay, back. Everything normal. Okay.
Never do a moment. I start again. So, I had gone through various phases. I had been in the music industry. These were not really my best years. And, I needed some time to rethink a lot of things. And in that process, I actually remembered what the old violinist that sold collars and the man that had lived through the ordeals of the camp had told me. I said, oh my, yes, this Theosophical Society. I just want to have my life in order. And it was 3 decades after I had gotten to know these names of these, particular indications about cause and effect and reincarnation. And what I did, I grabbed the telephone book, and at this time you still had telephone books, and I found the Theosophical Society, and I called, and I made an appointment. I just felt that I needed to see what these theosophists were all about. So I went to the headquarters in Amsterdam in the Tolstraat, and Ali Ritzema was there. And I introduced myself, and we started talking. And then something very remarkable happened. It was as if I met someone whom I had known a long time before. And for me, this was, quite an experience. And our conversation got at one point so emotional that we had to move to another quarter. I was sitting in an office, there were other people there, and they could listen in and whatever. And then Ali said, why don't we go upstairs and to another quarter, and there we can talk further. And for me, this might sound corny, but it is certainly not meant to be corny. It was like as if I finally had gotten home after all my journeys and travels to Australia and all these things. For me, it was like a sort of revelation. This is the place where I need to be. These are the people I want to be with. And fortunately for me, Ali immediately understood my being and the reason why I had gone there. And she gave me the opportunity to start working for the TS almost immediately. I had been with them for 1 or 2 weeks, and then she called me and she said, why don't you come and do this or do that? So Ali, in that respect, really opened the doors. She is standing here, a little photograph on the back of me, and she unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But, I know that she is watching over us and over me, and I miss her. But she was really the one who gave me the first push forward to go into this theosophical journey.
That's wonderful. I loved Ali so much also. I actually met her at the European School of Theosophy in 2006-5 here in Athens, Greece.
Yeah.
Now, I do have another question. Could you please name some names of people from the Theosophical movement who inspired you most and explain why? So I'm talking about persons actually living, persons that you have met. I know that, for example, your first experience with John Aljo was a bit challenging. And could you comment on that, please?
Oh, yeah, I can. The first time, let's talk about John Aljo first. John and I met for the first time when I was working for the TS in Holland, and I was actively involved with events that took place at the International Theosophical Center in Naarden. And John came over, I think it was, I don't remember the year exactly, I think it was 95 or 94. He came over to do a series of talks on Sensar, and that is really, something he really knew a lot about, and had a beautiful presentation. And one of the tasks that I was involved in was doing the sound recording and, putting everything ready. And to be honest, I just did not know. To be honest, I just did not really know what to think of John, because he was a little distant, he was demanding, and I just really could not figure out what to think of him at that time. Later, of course, that all changed, and I think that it particularly changed when I gave a talk at the headquarters of the TS in Wheaton. And John and Adele were there too. There was an event, I think it was of the Inter-American Theosophical Federation, of which my wife, Teresina, later on became the president. And I gave a talk. I'll never forget the title of my talk and a word that I pronounced wrongly. The talk was called Obstacles on the Path. And John and Adele were sitting on the first row, and there were a lot of people there. And Adele had this custom, Adele, the wife of John, of course, to take pictures and take little notes and whatever. And the talk went fine, I thought. And people came to me afterwards to congratulate me. It was a good talk. And then John and Adele came up to me. And John said, with his tenor voice, Jan, that was a good talk, and I'm sure you're going to give it again. But bewildered is wrong. It is bewildered. At that moment, I thought, oh my goodness, he really means well. And from that moment on, I think, although perhaps a bit difficult in the beginning, the ice was broken, and I became, more fond of them. And later on, also in my endeavors, but we can talk about it a little later on, with Theosophy Forward, he was a very important force. The other person I have to mention, of course, is Joy Mills. Joy was really, I think, the best teacher I have ever had. And also in this respect, and I mean that also respectfully, she was not always an easy teacher, or, she would, if you would give a silly answer, or you would completely miss that thing that she was so busy with explaining to you, she would make that known. But Joy was someone, that, could make a comment like that in the class. And she did that with me, actually. At one point, we went to Crotona to do a course on the Mahatma letters. And I don't know what sort of silly remark I made, but I made a silly remark. And she would say in front of all the other people, no, Jan, that is not very smart what you're saying. Oops, in the middle of the class. But she was also that type of a lady that would come to you afterwards and say, Jan, don't take it personal, please study a little bit more. So Joy, here on the photo together, this was taken at Crotona, was a wonderful, wonderful teacher.
Yeah.
A giant.
It's you here, Joy, and your wife, Terezinha.
Yeah.
And to the left, it's John. Yeah. Last time I saw John, he was actually here in Athens, and we took him to Acropolis.
Yeah.
He and Adele. Adele, she was already with oxygen, so she could not climb up to Acropolis. So my husband, George, went up to Acropolis with John, and I stayed with Adele in a coffee place. Yeah.
May I just make one more comment about John and Adele? My introduction to him was a bit difficult. But later, it was totally different. And especially after Adele had fallen ill. I remember we were at Sweden, and Terezinha and I, and they invited us to go to some restaurant. And she was already using the oxygen mask and whatever. And the love that he showed for Adele was incredible. The care that he had for her was so impressive. It was so, heartwarming to see this big man looking after his wife. I'll never forget it. And the last thing about John, I love him. He was also able to admit his errors, like Olcott, if he would do something which was perhaps not the right thing to do, he had the courage and the guts to say, okay, I was wrong. And that is a good characteristic. There you go.
Yes, a very important one. Could you also, Ian, share with us what has touched you and inspired you most in the Theosophical world, or since you became a member of the Theosophical Society?
I could talk for hours and hours about that, and I know that we have a limit in time. I think Theosophy for me is just simply connecting all the dots. And I'm not a scholar, I admit. I'm not a person who is able to quote or to, go back to the original writings or whatever you want to call them, although I have read a lot. But for me, Theosophy is, in the first place, a way of life. It is trying to make this place a better place, the planet on which we live. I think through the study of Theosophy, I came to discover that everything that we see around each other are actually all those things, the good things and the things that are not so good, are interconnected. For example, now I understand that Corona the coronavirus, the corruption, the intolerance, the not understanding of one another, are all based on the same thing. It is ignorance and also caused by the loss of identity of people. I think people are no longer aware of their spiritual, or if you wish, their religious identity. And I think through Theosophy, which is one way, there are also other philosophies and ways in which we can improve this world. But Theosophy for me is the most comprehensive system of thought. Through Theosophy, I came to understand that everything is interconnected, that everything has the same and just the one source, and that if we really want to make this place a better place, we have to go to that source. And we have to start from there on, not to proclaim that we know it all, but at least to show people a way in which they can possibly move. And I think that is what attracted me in Theosophy the most, Erika.
Thank you. What about Theosophy Forward? I mean, the work you are doing is incredible. The e-magazine is the largest theosophical magazine online, with readers from all over the world. You have interviewed also many theosophists with that series of mini interviews, which I say it's the who is who from the theosophical world. So this is such an important contribution. Could you please say something about the aims of the magazine?
Yeah, it was a sort of reaction to what had happened in the period 2007 to 2008, 2009, when there was a rather tumultuous election for international president. And what hurt me most of all in that period, Erika, was the fact that I saw that people who were friends or were talking to each other and had a good understanding, all of a sudden would not talk to each other anymore, because the big division had arisen. You were either here or you were there, and I just could not understand that. So my main motivation to start with Theosophy was to just present something nice, to present something positive, to present something which would be acceptable for a lot of people. And that was the reason. And you just mentioned the mini interviews. We've done, I think, about 400 and something. And that's why I was a bit nervous at the beginning, because I was always the one who was asking the questions, and now I'm the one that gets the questions thrown at him. The beginning was a bit difficult because, to be honest, I had no experience at all with a website, with a template. I didn't know what Joomla was or WordPress. In the beginning, we made an error. John was very helpful at the beginning, but we decided in the beginning to work with synonyms, with, nom de plumes, not synonyms, but with an alternative name. And that, of course, did not work, because that doesn't go on the internet. So after a couple of months, I had to actually, reveal my identity. But that quickly went pretty well. And yes, at the moment, I have about 13 categories still. We produce articles in 4 different languages. And before this interview started, I looked at my statistics. Yes, I have readers in more than 112 countries. So I don't know if I'm the biggest, but at least it has an enormous sort of influence. It has an enormous sort of outreach. Actually, the other day, I received a note from people in Tehran if I could help them finding theosophical contacts. And yeah, Theosophy Forward was, an endeavor that I wanted to place in the world in order to present something that was not directly related to, disharmony and whatever. And now it has grown into a mature magazine, and a lot of people are still contributing to it. And particularly, and I really want to stress this, people from all theosophical organizations. It is really a platform where everybody is welcome without any preconditions, without any, limitations.
Yes. Now that you mentioned about people from all different theosophical organizations, there is the inter-theosophical dialogues, cross-pollination.
Yeah.
You were the vice president of the International Theosophical Conferences for around 4 years.
Yeah.
Some time ago, you resigned from your position, and now you have left the ITC, even as a member. You have also written an article called Alas, pointing out that the inter-theosophical dialogues based on sharing and listening to different viewpoints without any preconditions, as it was initially set up by ITC, has gone off the rails. You also pointed out in your article that you feel that the element of the freedom of thought, which is a very important pillar for the Theosophical Society, is not compatible with the current course of ITC.
Yeah.
Would you please comment on that?
Yeah, I knew this was coming, and it is a difficult subject, but I'll try to be as honest as I can possibly be honest. And let me just tell you this. I have been with ITC, International Theosophy Conferences, for a great number of years. I'm going to go through a sort of chronological overview of all the meetings that I attended. But let me just refer to the very first one, and then we'll continue about it a little bit further. But the first one was in Julian, exactly 10 years ago. And when I was there together with Teresia, who was invited to give a talk there, and Tim Boyd, who at that time was the vice president of the American section under Betty Blend. I felt that when I was there, that a lot of things needed to be, looked into in order to understand one another better. And that is what I have tried to work on over the years. 2011 was Julian. 2012, we went to Wheaton, which was a great success. Then there was a meeting in New York in 2013. I will go through it very quickly. At the time, during the preparations, I did not know what to think of that meeting in New York. Now, looking back, I think it was a very vibrant meeting. Then 2014, it was the meeting in Naarden, which, was breathtaking, to be quite honest, because all these people came together, also members from, the various theosophical organizations, and they literally came from everywhere. René Sell from all the way from New Zealand. We had people from Colombia. We had people from the United States, many European countries. It was a big jump forward, but I think, to be quite honest, it might also have been the beginning of the end of ITC as I understood it, because it's always how do you look at things? What is your idea? So I'm honest enough to say that, at that moment I had an idea of what ITC was. I think what is important to realize is that one particular organization actually took charge of the daily operations, administration wise, also when it came to the website and all the other things. One organization became very dominant. And I saw that happening actually also during the 2015 meeting in The Hague. I remember that there was a member from the ADR organization who gave a talk, and he just mentioned very briefly the names of Leadbeater and Annie Besant. That was in 2015 in The Hague. And the guy that was sitting next to me started like, pure theosophy, please. So there was already this sort of, unbalance. The meeting after that was in Santa Barbara, I think it was. That was the last meeting I personally participated in. Then there was a meeting in Philadelphia, which I helped set up through the facilities of the internet. I was not particularly present during that meeting. And I think also, to cut a long story short, ITC actually became an instrument of the organization that was very much involved in doing the day-by-day business. And that is, these are the folks from Blavatsky House in The Hague, Holland. So they do the membership administration, they do the website, they are very well versed on organizing things, they have the equipment, and you name it. So I think when I saw all that happen, and I felt that the initial idea of bringing theosophists together without any preconditions and without any bylaws and without any declarations, just to have the open dialogue, had gone down the drain, simply. I mean, and this is not something I invent, something that I just state. They have their regulations, they have their declarations, they have their purposes, they have their bylaws, and you have to go by them. And if you don't, there is a problem. So I could no longer be a part of that. And, that was not very pleasant to realize. But, life is dynamic. And what was very relevant in the beginning is not current any longer. So I could no longer support that initiative in the way it has developed into. Now, ITC is there, I think, basically for myself, and I take full responsibility of this remark. For me, ITC does not exist anymore. It is another sort of thing now. It is another current. It is another flow. And I have to accept that. And, the folks in Holland became friends of mine. Some of them I came to know pretty well, and I don't wish them any harm. I don't wish them any bad luck. I wish them very, prosperous futures with their endeavors, because they're also trying to do what they think is best. But I think that when you come to the freedom of thought idea, and that is a pillar in Adya thinking, they have not quite understood that. For them, and I'm talking about the folks in The Hague, everything is approached through axiomas, through mathematical approaches, through formulas. It is very mental. And I think that if that would have been only, concentrated on their own organization, that's perfect. If they do that within what they believe in, and if they do that within their own boundaries, that's perfect. I don't think it was wise to copy and paste that into ITC. So I think that's what I want to say about it.
So could you please tell me how do you deal with challenges and disappointments? Yeah.
I have a garden here. It's about 10,000 square meters. And if I do have a problem, then, I walk around in the garden. Or I have this, it might be a surprise for you, I have a blues harp here. So if I have a disappointment, I just play a little bit like this. So it's the Teals blues, to get it off my chest. And if that is not enough, I go upstairs with a beautiful baby grand piano and I play the piano. And that's how I try to get through my difficulties and my, the obstacles that I face. And I must admit, Erika, I'm at my best when I'm stand with my back against the wall and things are really, that I can't go anywhere and I have to do something. And I always try to make the best of it in the positive sense. So I go from a negative to the positive, as I did after my article, alas, was published, which caused a shockwave, actually, and particularly within ADR circles. I just thought, well, I've told my story. This is it. In the meantime, I'm already 3 chapters further. There's a lot of interaction amongst theosophical groups, which are very, very interesting. I will not go into too many details, but I know that in California, students of the United Lodge are doing programs together with folks that live and work at Crotona. I got a hold of a publisher in Norfolk of the Theosophical Trust Memorial Library, and together with him, we are going to, on Theosophy Forward, publish articles of Sri Raghavan Iyer, who was an exponent of the United Lodge of Theosophists, especially in the 1970s and early 80s. So there's a lot of exchange going on already, and it all happens organically. Yeah? And I wish to state this, really, I hope that also in the TSRDR, as well as in other organizations, but in particular, the organization that I am a member of, that we are able to concentrate on that first object. It's so important, Erika, the first object. And of course, also to really live the freedom of thought idea.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you would like to say?
If there is still time. Well, I think one thing that I am concerned about, and that is something that I was already concerned about some time ago. At the moment, everything is on screens. Everything is remote controlled. Everything is on Zoom. We live in the Zoom boom, right? Everything is there. And thanks to Zoom, we can communicate. I understand all that. But what I really would like to emphasize is that, we have to go back to meeting each other in the flesh, so to speak. We need to feel each other's energy again. This is all, superficial. And I understand that due to COVID, this is the best alternative we have. But I remember that I spoke last week to Patricia Calvi in Italy. And she told me, she said, Jan, we had a real meeting again for the first time in 2 years. And it was emotional. Okay, everybody had to wear a mask and the chairs were far apart from one another. But they were together again. And it was so wonderful to be with one another. It was, let's face it, and forgive me for the expression, but every idiot can set up a Zoom meeting. If you have the technology, if you have the connections, if you have the people to reach, you can set it up. Great. But what is behind it? What is the energy behind it? So I pray to God, whoever he or she is, that one day we will be able to get back together again in the flesh, and that we can meet at ADR, that we can meet in the lodge room, and that we really are able to communicate with one another through direct communication in each other's aura, in each other's energy.
Yes, the human contact is very important, and I'm sure a balance will be found between Zoom meetings and presence meetings. And also, it's very important that you mention universal brotherhood and sisterhood, because that I think that should be our guiding star in the work that we are doing as theosophists. Now, are you gonna sing anything to us?
Oh, I have to ask my manager permission first. No. Oh, I hope, no, I don't, I'm a little shy.
Oh, you're a little shy. So I'm gonna play something.
No, you don't. Are you really going to do?
Let me just find it. Give me 1 minute. Okay, can you see it? That is you actually singing love. So tell me if you can listen to the sound well. What?
Love
Yes.
is real,
The voice.
Oh my goodness.
real is love. Love is feeling, feeling love. Love is wanting to be loved. Love is touch. Touch is love. Love is reaching, reaching love. Love is asking to be loved.
Ador.
Love is you, you and me. Love is knowing we can be.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I'm going to share the link to your song. I'm going to put a link to it underneath the interview, and also a link to the e-magazine Theosophy Forward, so anyone interested can go and visit. You had a wonderful voice. When was that recorded?
Oh, I have to say it was recorded some time ago when I was a little younger in the kitchen of a friend of mine called Ada Otting. I was going to cook, but we never came to cooking, so we started to make music. And Ada would play the piano, I would play a part of the synthesizer. And then before we knew it, this beautiful John Lennon song was there, Love is Real. So it's, you know, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to mention Ador's name. He was a well-known musician in Holland. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us. But yeah, that was quite an experience, that afternoon in his house. And actually, it was recorded in the kitchen, just with a tape deck. Can you imagine?
Yes, yes, it's fantastic. So, Ian, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and sharing your experiences and your views on Theosophy, and also your songs and your journey, traveling through so many countries and so on. Let's hope that, let's remember always, you know, John Aljo, he once said, let's agree that we disagree, you know, and understand that we are family. So, and try to find the best ways to move forward together.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think that's the spirit, isn't it?
Okay, I want to thank you very much for your hospitality and for giving me the opportunity to talk, and thanks also for all the hard work you are doing, because that is really a hell of a job that you have.
Thank you so much for the support and for all you are and all you have been doing also. Yeah. So don't just go away, just a minute. Bye everyone who was watching us live. We are stopping our live.